So none of us are ever taught how to feel and process and integrate our emotions. And as a result, almost all of us have gone through life resisting and repressing our emotions at every turn. And we thought we were getting away with it. But it turns out that when you resist and repress your emotions, they don't just disappear, right? Unable to move freely, they lurk in the system and they accumulate over time, and they're continuously sort of active in the background, being re-triggered and generating anxiety and depression and anger issues and low self-esteem and fatigue, chronic pain, autoimmune disorders, all kinds of things. Not always, I'm not saying it's always the case, but in many cases can be linked back to these stuck emotional energies that we've been resisting and repressing our entire lives. Not only that, when we resist and repress our negative emotions, we cut ourselves off also from our positive emotions, our joy, our creativity, our motivation, our aliveness, right? The good news is it is possible to start to get back in touch with your emotions and learn how to feel and process them again. And then you gain access to this whole panoply, this vast smorgasbord of juicy human experience. You're once again in touch not only with the anger and the fear, but also the joy, the creativity, that vibrant aliveness starts to saturate your experience again as these energies begin to move, right? Your being is flowing rather than being this stuck, reactive sort of block of frozen emotion. So in this video, I'm going to give you a whistle-stop tour of how to deeply and cleanly process your emotions, right? So we're going to be looking at what is an emotion, what does it mean to process an emotion, like why don't we, what gets in the way of us processing emotions, and then we'll go through a process for helping you to just get right in there and start processing some emotions in a safe and compassionate way, right? So what is an emotion? It's a signal from your nervous system that is motivating you to move in the direction you need to go to meet your physical and psychological needs, right? So anger, for example, motivates you to stand up for yourself so you don't get taken advantage of. Fear motivates you to run away from a threat so that you can stay safe. Shame kind of motivates you to behave in the ways that you need to behave to survive in the society, in the tribe that you find yourself in. So you might feel ashamed after you lie to your friends, for example, because you know it's not right. It's not the done thing in your group of friends. And so shame might come up and prevent you from doing that the next time, right? So it's an energy that is putting you into motion, emotion, to move in the direction of meeting your physical and psychological needs and staying safe and surviving, right? And it manifests as a physiological energy, right? So it's not a head thing. It's in your body. That's where your emotions live and move and have their being, right? It's that sinking feeling in the pit of your stomach. It's that rage in the chest. It's that fear you feel in your that tension you feel in your arms and legs, right? This is the stuff of emotion. And what does it mean to process an emotion? Well, emotions are meant to be felt. That's what they're designed to do. And an emotion has been processed when it is being felt so fully and openly and without resistance that it reintegrates back into your being. So it arose within you and then it kind of falls back into you. And the more purely, quote unquote, cleanly you can meet that feeling, that emotion, and feel it, the more wholly it will be integrated. This is kind of a function of resistance. Like the less you are resisting and being accepting and welcoming of that emotion, the easier a time it'll have sort of flowing through you and being reintegrated back into your system. And how do you tell that you've processed an emotion? Well, it won't get triggered up anymore. So say there was some situation in your life, like your sister always says this one thing that really triggers you and just makes you really angry, right? If you've properly integrated that anger, when your sister says that one thing that she always says that always triggers you again, it won't generate that visceral internal reaction anymore, because the emotion won't be there in the same way. It won't be there waiting to be triggered. It will have been integrated, and so it won't get triggered back up anymore. And so your sister can say what she wants, and you'll stay pretty calm. And you can sort of half integrate emotions as well, So, you could, if you've integrated some of the anger, you'll have a less intense response to whatever it is she might say. And what happens when we fail or are unable to process and integrate these emotions? You'll find that there's sort of three things that happen. Firstly is that emotional energy will get stuck. So emotions have an arc. They want to rise, be felt, move you to safety, and then they can relax. But as they rise, if we start resisting them, they sort of get stuck at that point. They can't go any further, right? And then so they sort of, that emotional energy has to go somewhere, right? So it sort of stores itself in the body, in the nerve endings, the muscles, the tissues, the fascia, right? And it's in a state of readiness, waiting to complete its mission, so to speak, right? So it's on tenterhooks, waiting to be triggered. The second thing that happens is that, I kind of alluded to in the first part, is that these emotions are then constantly in the background. They're always on, and they're kind of looping in your system, waiting to be re-triggered, right? And that's why you'll find yourself sort of repeatedly reacting in the same ways, right? There might be slightly different circumstances. If every time you have a job interview, for example, you break out in a cold sweat, that's the same emotional reaction happening again and again and again. Even if you've nailed every job interview you've ever had, it'll just keep coming up again and again until you meet the emotion in question. And the third thing is that these stuck emotional loops have a profound impact on your life. They are the lens through which you see the world. So if you have lots of fear in your system, you'll see the world through the lens of fear. You'll be constantly looking out for threats, because that's what these emotions are here to do. They're here to look out for threats. If you've got a lot of anger in the system, then that can manifest in multiple ways. But one way that could manifest is sort of similarly getting really pissed off at everything. You get very easily triggered, like everything sort of offends you or just triggers that rage. You find life to be very frustrating on the whole, for example, right? These become the lens through which you see the world. Now, why is it that we struggle to process these emotions? Two reasons: resistance and repression. So resistance was a strategy we had to go to because we didn't have the support we needed. Emotions were too overwhelming. So when we were a kid, there are emotional experiences that happened that were just too overwhelming for our young nervous system. But our parents didn't know how to give us the support we needed to be with that emotion, right? So that means we had to resist it. And that was the right option. The alternative was essentially to completely frazzle our nervous system with this overwhelming emotion, which would have been extremely dangerous and just traumatizing. So we had to resist that emotion. So that's the one way. The second way is repression, which is more along the lines of emotions that we have are not allowed by people around us, right? It doesn't feel safe in relationally to express certain emotions. So our parents might not like it when we get angry, for example. So every time we start getting a bit angry, they're like, don't do that. There's an instant shutdown. Then we start repressing it. We learn that, okay, in order to keep my parents on side, I can't express anger. And we learn that, and we wear that groove in and in and in and in and in until we don't even realize when anger comes up. As soon as anger comes up, before we even notice, bam, it's been repressed, right? And that's the magical and amazing thing about repression, is once you get really practiced at it, which we all are by the time we become adults, we don't even know we're experiencing feelings and emotions. They get repressed in the blink of an eye so quickly that we don't even see them. Right? And that's precisely why it works so well. If we saw the repression mechanism, then it wouldn't work, because we would be seeing what happens, but we don't. We're unconscious of it, right? So these are the major reasons why we do this, and there's very good reasons for resisting and repressing emotions when we are small. but it has all these negative consequences I outlined at the beginning. So it's about time we learn how to do it, right? And that's what we're going to turn on to now. So how do we process emotions? We're going to go through a few steps. It's discerning it, feeling it, listening to it, embodying it, making sure that you're grounded and that the emotion is contained, and then working intelligently with resistance and repression. That's sort of the steps I'm going to go through, go into detail on each. So the first one is to discern the emotion. So emotions always take place in your direct experience, remember. I said that there are physiological energy that you can feel, and it has a size and a location and a color. It has a bit of movement, maybe. It could be vibrating and moving, or it could be very static and dull. It could be open, it could feel closed. All these kinds of things. So the first step is just to notice what it is you're actually experiencing in your direct experience, not your mind's narrative about it. It's like, oh, I'm so angry because Steve, he stole my waffle, or whatever it is. Like, drop the waffle, forget about the waffle, and just concentrate on the actual feelings. So that maybe you notice there's tightness, tension in the chest, or there's a bit of a sort of a fire in the belly. Maybe there's tension in the hands. You know what I mean? The first step is just to notice. And from there, you can also discern which emotion it is, which is very helpful too. It's like, is it anger? Is it shame? Is it fear? Or even which flavor of emotions? Is it, if it's anger, is it frustration? Or is it irritation? Or is it rage? Is it resentment? Second step is to feel that emotion. This is where things get tricky. This is where people start to turn off. So this is very simple in principle. Feeling an emotion means putting your attention on it. So if you can imagine that your attention is like a finger, so that you put that finger of your attention into the heart of the emotion itself. That energy that you've discerned, you place your finger on it, right? And that's pretty much all you have to do. And you just do your best to stay with it, staying present with it. Right? So not jumping into the mind. There'll be a tendency to do that. Just doing your best to stay with it, notice it, look at it, see how it's moving. And you can feel it in different ways as well. You can, another way is to sort of imagine, I like to imagine it's like a beach ball almost, and you sort of are holding both sides of that beach ball. So the emotion's in the middle. You're kind of holding it like that and just being really gently holding it. And that's a really good way of feeling it too. That can often be enough. I mean, that's a brilliant start. You're then well on your way, because the key part of feeling the emotion is to let it be as it is. Right, that's what we're doing. We're doing our best to let fear be fear, to let anger be anger, to let sadness be sad, and so on. And that's where resistance can start coming up, which is why we talk about that in a little bit. So just stay tuned for that. So now you've discerned the emotion, you're doing your best to feel it, you've got your attention on it, you're doing your best to let that fear be fear, that anger be anger. Then we want to start listening to the emotion, right? Because emotions are like little people. They all have things to say. They have histories, they have desires and goals and fears and so on. And you can discern these in your experience by asking the emotion itself, essentially. And you want to kind of put your attention on the emotion. You don't want to ask your head what you think about why do you think you're afraid or something like that. That'll give you a head answer, which is just a guess. You can actually ask the emotion itself. So you want to put your attention on that energy and ask a question of it, like you're just dropping a pebble into a pond. You just drop it and you just wait for the ripples to emerge. And you can ask questions like, why are you here? What do you need? What are you afraid of? If you had a voice, what would you say? Do you have something to tell me? When were you created? These kinds of things will give you clues as to why this emotion is here, what it's trying to do, and therefore how you can help it. That information you can use in the next steps to sort of guide your inquiry. The next part is to embody the emotion. Now, most of us feel very self-conscious and uncomfortable embodying emotions. And by this, I can best explain it with an example. Think about how a 3-year-old experiences anger or fear or sadness, right? They really embody it. They use their body to fully express and become and be and merge with that emotion. Now think about how like quite a sort of stiff adult might experience anger. You know, they repress it. They glare at people instead. They don't get angry. They just glare. Or fear. They don't express. There's no expression. It's all held in, right? And the body has no movement in it, so they can hold it in. And so we want to start reversing that and allowing these energies to start to move through us using our posture, standing up, sitting down, lying on the floor, our gestures, you know, moving the hands and the legs and the limbs, and even our voice, like saying words or making sounds, right? So you can get anger, right? Or like shame might be like, oh, fuck. It feels icky, right? Fear is like really tense. It's like fuck. You've got tons of sympathetic energy running through the arms and the legs. And so you can get in touch with this by, again, getting in touch with that energy that you've discerned and just asking yourself, like, how does the energy want to move? If it were a seed, how would it grow? In which direction would it flourish? What sound would this emotion make if I had to give it a sound? This kind of thing. And then again, and feel a little uncomfortable at first, just seeing if you can let your body lead you and show you what it is that the emotion wants. So if it's anger, you just tune into the body and just allow it. You'll get an impulse for how it wants to move in a particular direction, and your task is to let it move in that direction and let it spontaneously and naturally unfold, and do your best to kind of stay out of the way. And again, resistance and repression will arise here, and that's cool. That's perfect. Just stay aware of it, and we'll work with that. We'll explore that in a sec. So to recap here, we have these 4 core steps for processing an emotion. The first one is to discern it, to identify what kind of emotion it is, anger, fear, and so on, where in the body it is, and what kind of qualities and characteristics it has. This is so you can start to get to know it, enable yourself to get curious about it. Then we feel the feeling, we put our attention on it, we try and let it be as it is, and we're doing our best to stay really present and conscious with it. That's the key, because normally we're up in our heads. Emotions are going on down here, we're up in our heads, we're bringing the attention down, and we're staying with it. It's the presence, it's the being with it, being conscious with it, that does the magic, that allows the emotion to process and integrate, right? That's the key. Then we can go deeper by listening to the emotion, asking it if there's anything it needs to say, it wants to say, anything it needs, stuff like that, to elicit some of the deeper material from within it, which can then help it to process a bit deeper, you know, because there might be some memories that are attached to it. There might be something it's wanting to say that it didn't have the chance to say when you were small, like if you're angry when you were small and you wanted to tell someone to fuck off, but you couldn't do it at the time because you would have been told off. And so it might, you know, it might want to express that now, right? And it might need to do that before it's willing to relax. And then you have the embodiment stage, where you are using your body to allow, express, and merge with that emotion. Because often, you know, we're quite closed and cold with our emotions. We instead want to really let it come forward and use the body as a way of channeling it. In the next step, though, it's important to remember that you don't want to do this just any old how. You don't want to just let a whole flood of emotion come up, be completely overwhelmed. You'll just end up re-traumatizing yourself. Instead, the 5th step is to stay resourced, grounded, and contained. So when an emotion is contained, it means that you have enough capacity in your nervous system to be with it as it is and allow it to be as it is, right? Without having to resist it or repress it, and without getting overwhelmed by it on the other hand, right? And everyone has their own different capacity for how much they can hold, so to speak, right? And there's a sweet spot for processing emotions where the emotion is not too repressed, because you need the emotion to be up and active in your system on the one hand to be able to process it, but you don't want it to be too much, otherwise you'll get overwhelmed. And there's kind of a sweet spot where it's contained and held, where it can be active and moving and expressing, but it's not overwhelming you. And the way we do this is by, well, there's many different ways, but one is resourcing. So ensuring that we always have one foot in safety, so to speak. That, we can bring our nervous system back down a little bit if it's getting too on edge. We have different techniques for that. I've spoken about that. I have a whole video on resourcing, which you can check out on my channel. But that stage is super important to remember, to keep an eye on your containment. It's like kind of imagine a tap that's turning on. You don't want to just blast the tap full blast, nor do you want a tiny little drip coming out. You just want a steady, sustainable flow to be going through, essentially. Now let's talk a little bit about resistance and repression, because you will find at various points, if you're trying to work with your emotions, that you'll be resisting your emotions, and can be quite difficult to spot. But you want to just look out for these little parts of these little tensions, the mind coming in to distract, right, with random thoughts about something else, a sense of pushing emotion down or away, or not allowing it forwards. Like if you want to cry, but you get this tension in your face holding it back. These kinds of things are resistance to a particular emotion. And there are a few ways of dealing with this. First one is starting at the edge of the emotion. So don't dive straight in. Just imagine your attention again as a finger. So it's like you put your finger on the edge of that emotion, right? So you don't dive all the way in, you just put the finger on the edge and you just stay there. And then maybe slowly you creep forward a little bit if it feels okay. And that way you can slowly feel into it, and it feels safer to go in slowly than all at once. Another one is pendulation. This means going back and forth between two sensations. So you could go and feel the emotion for a bit, a minute, half a minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, however long. And then whenever it feels appropriate, just putting your attention on some other more neutral or pleasant or supportive sensation. So you could then just put your attention on your feet, for example, feeling your feet on the floor, or imagining a really nice memory, a beautiful place that you've been to, that kind of thing. Then you go back and forth between the two, and this makes it easier to stay with the emotion because you're not just with it all the time. Then you have slightly more advanced approaches, allowing the resistance. So if you can get a sense of the felt sense of the resistance, that part of you that's tightening against the emotion, you can lean into that and allow it. So just almost let that tension just resist. In your mind, like, no, just pushing away, and staying really present with it as you're letting it tighten. And if you can kind of hold it in that, if you can hold that tension, let it resist, maybe put a supportive hand on it, just sway a little bit, bring a bit of movement to the whole system as it's resisting. It will slowly relax. And when that resistance relaxes, there's a bit more access to the emotion. Now, the repression, on the other hand, it can be a little bit trickier, because this is in the form of like conditioned beliefs about why it's bad to express certain emotions. And what I found helpful here, actually, I should give you an example first. So you might have learned, you expressed anger when you were a child, and then your mum would tell you you're a bad kid, for example. Then, you kind of get this belief. It's like, if I express anger, I am bad. And you kind of unconsciously internalize that. And so what you've got to do is you've got to kind of face that fear of being bad, essentially, is the way you undo the repression, because it's repressing in order to avoid that feeling of being bad, right? So you can start there. You can also imagine, say, your mother telling you off for getting bad, and you might feel that shame come up. And it's like, that's what you want to work with. And you can be with that shame with the process we've described here. And then you'll find that the repression will loosen a little bit. You can also just, as you're imagining, like, you can almost imagine trying to get angry in front of your mother. Imagine that you're about to ring her up and get really angry down with her on the phone, and you'll notice that part of you tightening, which is kind of similar to the resistance. You notice that part of you tightening, like in the throat or the chest or something. And then similarly, again, you just allow it to tighten. Just do your best to really hold it, love it, breathe into it, letting it tighten. And in that way, it eventually starts to relax. And then there's more space for that emotion to come up afterwards. There's a lot more to say about those topics, but that's just a little brief intro. So that's the Whistle Stop Tour. Just to summarize, these emotions, they're this signal from the nervous system pushing us in the direction of what we need to survive physically and psychologically, to get love and food, promotions, and all this good stuff. And normally we've gone through life repressing and resisting them because we never knew otherwise. We had to, in order to, because it was too overwhelming to do otherwise. But now we've got these steps of, discerning them, feeling them, listening to them, allowing them to move through our bodies, and then making sure we're well contained, well resourced, and that we're working with the aspects of resistance and repression that might arise that are holding us back in different ways. If you do that, get a handle on that, you'll be doing great. So I hope you found that helpful. Please check out my website down below, drunkenbuddha.net. You can find more tools and resources, or you can come work with me. I work with people one-on-one doing this kind of work, helping people to process their emotions. So get in touch if that's interesting. Peace.